By now, you have heard about the NAACP's travel advisory for BIPOC and LGBTQ communities. Well, Senator Ted Cruz has decided to join the discussion. The junior senator from Texas tweeted, "This is bizarre and utterly dishonest. In the 1950s and 1960s, the NAACP did extraordinarily good helping lead the civil rights movement. Today, Dr. King would be ashamed of how profoundly they've lost their way." Within hours, King's youngest child, Bernice King, responded to the tweet saying, "What my father would be deeply concerned about is the harmful discriminatory legislation in Florida." If Dr. King were still alive today, would he support the NAACP's stance on Florida? Joining me now to answer this question and discuss so much more is Yohuru Williams. He is the founding director of the Racial Justice Initiative at the University of St. Thomas. Yohuru, I want to thank you for joining me. You are a historian. And one of the things that I know irritates historians are sort of hypothetical counterfactuals. In other words, if such and such had happened differently, what would such and such be? If there had been no slavery, what would black folk be doing? If Dr. King were alive and not murdered in April 4th, 1968, how would he think about Florida? I get y'all don't like this. So I'm not going to ask you what Dr. King thought. But what I will say is, what do you make of Ted Cruz's assessment that somehow the boycott in Florida, or the call from the NAACP to boycott Florida, is itself an affront to Dr. King's legacy and his own political vision and mission?
Well, it's part of Senator Cruz's playbook, and unfortunately, Ron DeSantis and Governor Youngkin and many others, they do not read the words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. He delivered many more speeches than the I Have a Dream speech. He wrote 3 books in his lifetime. And these folks simply are anti-intellectual, so they don't know King and all of his complexity. They cherry pick a few lines from the I Have a Dream speech, and then they extrapolate from there and don't understand that not only would Dr. King be in support of, and this is an easy one, Mark, Dr. King absolutely would support the NAACP travel ban. In 1964, May of 1964, Dr. King led a campaign in St. Augustine, Florida, at that time trying to dramatize challenges in that state, which were consistent with what you saw throughout other parts of the South, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana. Florida was right there with them. Dr. King, while he was there, faced death threats, a failed assassination attempt. So, the attempt to say, as Senator Cruz did somehow, that Dr. King would not support this is just ahistorical and ridiculous, which is what we've come to expect from Senator Cruz and many others.
I mean, from December 5th, I believe, 1955, until December, don't get me wrong, I'm not a historian, December 20th of 1956, there was a Montgomery bus boycott. Dr. King was down with the Montgomery bus boycott. He helped organize the Montgomery bus boycott. So we know he believes that racial justice is important. We know he supports boycotts, and we know he supported critiques of the state of Florida in particular. So when we add all that together, I don't know what Ted Cruz is talking about. But what Ted Cruz also said in this tweet was that the NAACP travel advisory was bizarre and dishonest. I don't want to operate in bad faith. Is there any legitimacy to that argument that he says?
Absolutely not. In fact, I was just in Florida last week leading a teach-in with the Institute for Common Power against Ron DeSantis' efforts to sanitize African-American history. And we needed security at that 24-hour teach-in because of credible threats that the Institute for Common Power received and several of the professors who were participating and scholars who were participating in that action. So, I thought the NAACP's warning was timely. Of course, we were just there, as I mentioned. But more importantly, we live in a world now. We think about mass shootings. We think about the real danger and threats that people of color, specifically African Americans, face in public space. I think it was very responsible on the part of the NAACP to say, hey, people of color, black folks need to be careful when traveling to the state of Florida. This is hostile territory. And it's certainly something that Dr. King would have understood and supported again, because he faced similar challenges, again, not only in the Deep South, but also when he went to Chicago. Unfortunately, this is a portrait of America in black and white. And we can talk about the progress that we've made in some key areas, but it's clear in this particular area, this threat remains a threat to black people, and we have to take it seriously. And our organizations like the NAACP have to take it seriously.
Does it work? This isn't the first time the NAACP has issued a travel advisory. Do these efforts work?
I think it's more about consciousness raising, and I think it's also a form of protest. The NAACP is trying to say, by virtue of this travel ban, hey, Florida, we know what you're doing. We want people to know that they need to be careful. It's also an effort to subtly encourage people to perhaps not vacation in Florida, not support a regime in Florida under DeSantis, which is openly hostile to Black folks, to Black history. And I think it also speaks to, and we can go back to Trayvon Martin. I mean, that, of course, was Sanford, Florida. So we have to understand that in the larger context of our recent history and how Florida has been hostile to Black folks. The Black Lives Matter movement is born of the murder of Trayvon Martin in Florida, where George Zimmerman, appeals to stand your ground laws and guns down this teenager and leads to what some people would call the resurrection of, or at least the beginnings of, the third civil rights movement in this country. So, Florida definitely, I think the NAACP, again, was appropriate in taking this step. I think that they're also trying to accomplish more than just highlighting the danger to Black people in Florida. I think they're also saying we need to exert some pressure on Florida here by not spending our dollars in that state, not vacationing in that state, letting them know that we're going to use the power of the purse to fight back as well.
And the material impact of this is consciousness raising, as you said. It's also a form of protest on its own. But there's a way that maybe people inside of the state, business owners, power brokers inside of the state, and maybe everyday citizens say, look, we're not going to have the revenue for schools. We're not going to have the revenue to grow the state in the way that we want. We're going to be living in a state that is a national pariah, a black eye on the face of the United States. And if so, then maybe we have to fight our governor internally. Maybe we have to fight our state legislature internally when they attempt to propose policies that make us look crazy. In other words, if they're going to keep banning books and taking race conversation and history, accurate history out of the classroom, then, we're going to look bad, y'all. So let's vote differently. Let's vote for a different governor. Let's vote for a different state legislature. Let's fight for a different school board. I mean, these are actual outcomes that can happen if we apply the pressure. Is there any danger, though, before we go, brother, that this will only mobilize the right, that they'll feel attacked, that they will feel singled out, or they'll say the woke left is trying to destroy them? Will this only make DeSantis more of a rock star, I guess is what I'm really getting at?
Well, there's that danger, but the reality is they're already mobilized and they're already feeling pretty secure in their position in terms of the way that they proceeded with this effort to ban Black history and then other initiatives in Florida, which quite frankly are hostile to people of color, specifically to Black people. So I think we need to be less concerned about whether we trigger them and more concerned about what we can do to actively push back efforts like the effort to sanitize Black history. And to also do it in a way that, as you pointed out, Mark, puts pressure on people within the state to say, we can't afford Ron DeSantis. We can't afford this type of rhetoric. We can't afford this type of these types of legislative pushes. We have to redeem Florida in the eyes of America. And the only way to do that is to get rid of these extremist politicians who are more interested in kind of stoking fear and anger rather than building community.
That's it. The great Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. And this is one heck of a demand.